Hello, dear Polymer Clay enthusiast. I'm Mihaela from Learn Polymer Clay, and I hope that my message finds you well. And I hope that you are staying positive, creative, and that you are keeping your faith and use the time that we now have and use it well and in a creative way. As always, I want to encourage you to create more using Polymer Clay, and I have prepared a new tutorial, and I want to show you 3 ways in which you can use a variation of the hidden magic technique and make beautiful beads. And you can also use this idea and revamp your tools. In fact, I've always wanted to decorate my tools, but I have never had the time, so now I had the time to do it, and I encourage you to do it so because I don't know, it is so pleasant to work with the tools that look as you want them to look and that you've decorated them. So I hope that you like this idea and use it in your work with clay. Let's dive into the tutorial. This project is perfect for scrap clay, especially if you have beautiful leftovers from colorful canes. Or you can use a mix of scrap clay to make this base for the beads and use a little bit of clay in your favorite colors to make the upper part for the colorful beads. So I have previously conditioned my scrap clay, and then I passed it through the setting number 2 of my Atlas pasta machine, and then I folded it in half because I want to work with a double layer. And then I've used a pen. You can use a dotting tool to sketch the outline of the frame, and then you'll just have to use your craft knife and cut out the excess clay. Then you'll have to use your tools to smooth off the edges on the inside part of the frame and on the outside as well, of course. I'm also using my hands to smooth off the edges, but I'm very careful not to leave fingerprints. And then you can use a needle tool to make thin lines and texture the front of the frame. And then I've used the sculpting tool to make like a full carved design on the bead. And then I will flip the frame on the other side, and I will do just the same thing on the back. Again, I will use the needle tool to make these lines, and the sculpting tool to make carvings into the clay. And I wanted to give this frame an organic look. And then you'll just have to bake your pieces for 20 minutes at the temperature recommended by the polymer clay manufacturer. And here's an idea for a bead decorated with a variation of the hidden magic technique used with silver metal leaf. So again, I'm using the scrap clay which is in fact a mix of bright blue, dark blue, and bright red, but not so much red polymer clay. I passed the clay through the setting number 2 again, and then I applied metal silver leaf on top. I've used my fingers to press the leaf into the clay, and you'll just have to remove the excess leaf, and you will have to use a texture with a very deep impression. So I'm measuring the areas that I need for my beads, and I prefer working with smaller surfaces that are easier to decorate. And I'm using a texture that works very well for the hidden magic technique. I'm using a Lisa Pavelka texture plate. I think it's called Ethnic Borders, and this is a texture that I particularly like. And I'm using my hands, my fingers, to press the texture into the clay. You can use an acrylic block, you can use the roller, but it is very important to get a very nice and well-defined texture. And then you will just have to use a sharp, rigid blade and shave off some of the clay decorated with a silver leaf. And I'm trying to cut on the surface of the textured clay, and I don't want to have a piece that is so I'm not really doing the hidden magic, meaning that I'm taking out the raised areas from all over the piece. I want to have a rather distressed look for my piece, so I'm just removing the foil decorated parts in some areas, and I'm going to leave them in other areas. Then I am going to decide which part I want to use for my bead, and then I will just press the clay upwards with my fingers, and this is a technique that I'm sure you have already seen with cutters. You would press the clay outwards, and for this bead we are going to use the frame that is already baked to make the slightly domed area for the bead. And for this first idea, we are going to use this layer of clay to decorate the front of the bead, and I'm using liquid clay to glue the unbaked raw clay to the baked base. And I am applying also on the margins, because for this bead idea I intend to make a border, to cut out a border from a sheet of polymer clay and apply it to make a nice edge for the bead. Don't forget to press slightly on the clay and press this sheet of polymer clay to your frame, to the base. In the same time, I'm doing my best not to distort the domed part in the middle of the bead. Use your blade to trim off the excess clay all around the bead. And because I didn't like the look of the two layers together on the sides, I decided to use the scrap clay from this bead. So it's scrap clay with silver leaf scraps inside, and I'm putting this scrap clay through the pasta machine again, through the setting number 2 of my Atlas pasta machine, and I will just cut a border that will fit the width of my bead. So I'm checking the width to see the width I need for my strip of clay that I am going to use to decorate the border of the bead. And I think that this border is slightly larger than the width of my bead, so I continue to put a little bit on the clay and make it thinner. And in the same time, I'm also smoothing off the edges, the cutout edges, edges for the border. And then when you are happy with the size of the border, you can apply some liquid clay all around the bead. And then you'll just have to use this cutout border to beautifully decorate your clay bead. And I'm also pressing slightly on the border to connect it well to the base, to the bead. And then you'll just have to remove the excess and join the ends together and smooth this joining line. For an easier way to make these decorated beads, I've done again the same thing. I've passed the scrap clay through the pasta machine through the setting number 2. Then I've used the same texture plate to texture the clay. I've used the rigid blade to remove some of the raised areas to have a distressed look for my bead. And then again I've used the frame, and I've pushed the clay outwards to get a domed look for the piece. And I've cut out the excess clay, and I've cut out following the shape of the bead, of the frame, I would say. And for this bead, because I don't want to make a border and I want to make the process even simpler, I've used the flexible blade to trim off parts of the surface of the decorated sheet, and now the front part is slightly smaller than the frame. And then I did just the same thing. I've applied liquid clay and I've put it on top of the bead. Next, I'm going to show you a second idea for the to use this technique and make tubular beads. So again, I've used scrap clay. I've put it through the bath machine through the setting number 2. I've decorated it with silver leaf. I've used the same Lisa Pavelka texture plate to impress a texture. I've removed parts of the raised areas decorated with silver leaf. And then I will just cut some rectangles and I will use them to make tube beads. And you can use a skewer and put them and form these tube beads on top of a skewer. And you'll just have to join the ends together and smooth off this joining line. And I did my best to cut neat edges for my rectangle so I don't have to trim off any excess clay. As I said, use your tools to smooth off the joining line. And now you have easy to make beautiful tubular tube beads that you can use for your clay pieces, for your clay jewelry pieces. And here's idea number 3. And for this idea, I've used the same technique, but this time I am going to use colorful clay, let's say. So I'm just I've rolled bright red polymer clay into a log, and I put this clay inside a sheet of bright blue clay, and then I've torn it with my hands in 3. And I am going to use this layer of clay that I put through the setting number 4 of my pasta machine, and I'm going to use it on top of scrap clay, and this will give me a colorful look on the beads. So again, I'm putting the scrap clay through my pasta machine through the setting number 2. And then I am going to use the sheet of clay that is colorful, but you can use the colors of your choice, and you don't have to make to make a pattern. You can just put several colors together, put them through the pasta machine, and you will have colorful lines. So, or you can marble the clay and use marbled clay. I just wanted to have a little bit of color in my beads. And again, I've applied silver leaf on top of the layer of polymer clay. I've used the same textured sheet to texture the clay, and I'm going to use the rigid blade to remove part of the raised textured areas. And of course you can play with the pattern of the textured areas, and you can flip, you turn the textured pattern. Personally, I prefer the colorful beads, but I also like the effect of this variation of the hidden magic technique with just scrap clay in one solid color. This time I've applied liquid clay inside the border because I don't want to decorate the front part as we did for the first type of beads. This time I just I'm using the same technique. I'm pressing the clay outwards to get a domed effect for the beads, but then I will just remove the scrap clay and I will just keep the clay that is stuck to the interior part of the bead, which is why it is very important to apply liquid clay on the interior of the bead and press your decorated clay into these parts, and then you'll just have to use your craft knife to remove the excess clay on the back, making sure that your decorated sheet of clay stays stuck to the interior part of the frame. And again, you'll have to bake your polymer clay pieces for 40 minutes at the temperature recommended by the polymer clay manufacturer. And the final step of the process is varnishing the pieces in order to protect the silver metal leaf. And I am going to apply several coats, at least 2. This technique is great for decorating your tools. You can decorate the base of your craft knife, and anyway, it's a great idea to make lots of clay beads. So I've used the same texture plate but a different pattern, and I've used the decorated sheet of clay to decorate the handle of my craft knife. And of course you'll have to use varnish to protect all the pieces on which you've used metal silver leaf. You need to protect the leaf with varnish. In the same time, it's an opportunity for you to use up your scrap clay in a beautiful way. As always, I hope that you like this idea, and I hope that you are inspired to create more using polymer clay. I encourage you to watch my other tutorials and get inspired and use your clay to stay connected to your inner creative self. And of course I encourage you to connect with like-minded people on the internet, and the polymer clay community surely is an amazing community. So again, thank you, and stay tuned for more inspiration for work with polymer clay.